is part of our commercial team. And she is an amazing resource and so quick and ready to answer questions if you ever have any for any kind of commercial info that you're looking for or properties. Today she's going to do some Q&A and some info sharing on getting ready and looking at commercial mixed use properties. So I'll let you take it away, Ali, and then Lynette and Jitender, as you have questions or whatever, same with the other masterminds, it's pretty informal, so just jump in if you have anything that you want to ask, or ask it in the chat as well.
So I kind of prepared a little bit of a presentation. So I kind of used my experience when I've had a listing and some of the questions and due diligence items that I've seen other realtors come with that maybe they're not prepared for. So I did make some slides. So I think I have to share my screen for that.
Awesome.
So just give me a second. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay. And then I think I can just do the slideshow from here. And you guys see that full screen?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we've got mixed use properties and commercial leases. So first things first, you have a potential buyer who's looking at a mixed use property. What do you need to know about it? If, for example, you have a ground floor commercial space with 2 residential units above, there are certain things you and your client will need to know before proceeding. So I'm using a small example, but the same things would apply if you had a larger mixed-use property as well. So before you go and see the property with your client, there are plenty of due diligence items that you need to look into to determine if the building will even work for your client. So first things first, when buying the property, you will have to pay HST over and above the purchase price only on the commercial portion of the property. So when you see in the APS, partially subject to HST over and above purchase price, that's what you're going to have to tick off. Number 2, so the property taxes will be different on each portion of the property. So you will pay residential taxes on the residential portion, and you'll pay commercial taxes on the commercial portion. So when I'm underwriting the property, I kind of use 1.25%. Now, don't quote me on these rates, of course, but 1.25% is what they can expect to pay year to year, and then 3.5% for the commercial portion. So since it's kind of based on a percentage, how do you actually calculate the commercial versus residential percentage of the property and what they'll have to pay for each? So it's a pretty easy calculation. You just take the total square footage of the property, then you take the commercial portion divided by the total percent or the total square footage, you've got 56%, and then the residential is 44%. So basically, if you take the property taxes, you know that you're going to have to pay 1.25% on 56% of the purchase price and or of the assessed value, and then you'll have to pay 44% of commercial 3.5%, and then residential 1.25%.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
I had a property that my clients were very interested in, and 12% of the property was commercial because there was a number of garages on it, but they didn't want to use it as commercial. And they ended up backing away from the deal because of the taxes they would incur had they purchased this. Is there any way to get the commercial off the property if you're not using it for a commercial aspect? Like, can you get that switched or appeal it or something?
So you can, that would be a zoning change. So that actually does come up later on. I do touch on that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but great question.
Okay.
Can Ali, just in conjunction with that, so
Yep.
So if you have a mixed use, for example, I have one listed in Fall River, the upper level is commercial, the lower level is residential, but you can switch it, the commercial part back to residential, correct? But it doesn't change the zoning on it.
That's an excellent question, and I'm not exactly sure of the answer to that. I do believe you can revert it back to residential, and you're right, I don't know if it changes the zoning. I think, because you can apply for a zoning change,
Yes.
but yes, I'm not sure if it would actually change the zoning.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
kind of the same scenario.
Yeah.
I would change it back, and it would have been a whole other process. And
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know with these guys, it wouldn't change the zoning because everyone in that area, all the properties are mixed use.
yeah,
So they applied to change the upper level from residential, which it was originally, to commercial. And they were told by HRM that they could change that back at any point. It would change their taxes, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't
So a
affect
lot
the
of times if
zoning.
it's like, if it was already residential and then converted to commercial, it's a lot easier to convert it back. Whereas
Right.
if it starts off as commercial, I think there's a bit more of a process to convert it to
Right.
residential.
That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so next with the financing. So when it comes to a down payment or anything with a commercial component, so a lot of times the down payment is more to 25-30% versus the 5 to 10%. So it can be more or less depending on the strength or weakness of the leases. So say if you had like a month-to-month lease, that's a pretty weak lease. So the bank might see that and want something a little bit stronger or not feel like it has the strength to kind of take it into financing. So they might want more of a down payment. You know, Phil has seen sometimes where they even want like a 50% down payment, like 40 to 50% down payment. So, you know, it depends, like, is your buyer going to be able to front the cash if they can't get the financing that they want? So another thing is if you're buying a property for your business and using your business name to buy the property, financing will take a look at the strength of your business and kind of use your previous sales to determine if your business is strong enough. So lots of strength here. It will look at 2 previous years of financial statements and sales. So if the mortgage on the property is about $10,000 a month and you don't even have $10,000 in sales, they're not going to want you to buy the property. So like, where would the money be coming from? So these are all kind of questions and questions that you need to have with your potential buyer and things that you really have to get down to the nitty-gritty before you actually go and see a commercial property. So this is kind of where we get into the use and zoning. So what is your client's intended use of the property? Say if they want to go into a commercial property and, you know, they want to put a grocery store, or they want to take it and they want to turn it into a motel. Does the zoning even allow for that use? And a lot of times, I mean, if you go to the land use bylaw, I put the website link there. A lot of times it doesn't. And you got to kind of figure out to see how you can maneuver around that. Now, you can apply for a zoning change, but like everyone here has worked with HRM. They don't rush things. It could take 12 months, it could take 18 months, and there's a lot of fees, a lot of forms you have to fill out. And at the end of the day, they could still come back and say no. So that's a realistic thing that you'll have to go with your buyer and say, you know, it's not an easy process to change your zoning. So
it can sometimes be voted down by like the neighbors too, right?
I think so. Yeah.
I know I briefly approached changing a zoning from a residential to commercial or mixed use, and it was going to have to, it was in West Hants, but it was going to have to go basically to like to the paper, and then the county had 60 days to call in and give their thumbs down on it. And like, so basically a cranky neighbor could quickly squish it.
Yeah, I mean, community often has a lot of pull in what can happen in a certain area too. Yeah. So that's definitely something to think about as well. Did your client have to go through a lot of fees and forms and?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going through with it. We firmed and we firmed and it's long closed and they're still working on it. But like they said, yeah, West Hand said it could be a year.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's another thing too, to keep in mind, like if they're really relying on their business to be up and running by a certain time, you know, you've got to be clear with these timelines.
Mhm.
So the commercial lease. So first of all, when does the commercial lease even expire? So I saw it a lot in a building that I had on Flamingo. You know, we had a business that was running and their lease wasn't even up until September, you know, and we could have been looking in the winter time, so January, February. So you've got to be mindful of when the lease expires, because you can't just come in, buy a building, and then move your business in there immediately. The commercial lease outlives the sale of a property. So you've got to, it's not like in residential where you can get those forms and kind of evict the tenant and then just get up and running. It doesn't work that way. So you've got to make sure that if you're buying a commercial property, that it's not years away from when you would want to open your business. And if it is, if your client is okay with that.
I didn't know that about a commercial lease, that the commercial lease extends past and outlives the purchase.
Yeah, yeah, it does. So
Interesting.
the tenants, and like, say if the owners decided that they wanted to do a 5-year lease right before they sold the building, well, then that commercial tenant is in there for 5 years. You can't just kick them out. So it could
Wow.
be, I mean, like, say if it's a month-to-month lease, well, that's not a very strong lease, so that might affect your financing, but you could kick that tenant out with only 30 days notice. And like another way that you could do it is, say if the client has an early termination or something like that. But a lot of times that could be on the tenant side and the tenant's decision to do that. The landlord that, you know, can't necessarily kick them out even with that early termination. And a lot of times too, you're not really going to see that because that's not really beneficial to a landlord. And if it's a smaller mixed use property, they're not usually moving in there with the help of a realtor. They're just kind of doing handshake deals and whatnot. So, you know, it all depends. So another thing, when it comes to the due diligence items, there's a couple things that you'll have to do if the building has a commercial component to it. So has anyone seen phase 1 environmental before? Has it come up on your mixed use properties?
No, not on mine, because mine has been residential and then commercial, things like a yoga studio or something where there would never be any reason why the bank would say, yeah, you need a phase 1 environmental.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, you might run into this if it has a commercial component to it, and it will be done as part of the due diligence. So depending on what they find with the phase 1 environmental. So basically what this is you hire an environmental engineer and they come and they take soil samples of the property, take it back and see if there's been any contaminants on the property. So depending on what they find and what the site was historically used for, if there is soil contamination and it could potentially go through to a phase 2. And this could cost, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars out of a buyer's pocket. So for example, going back to that Flamingo Drive example, I was selling that building and it was right beside a dry cleaners, but it was uphill from a dry cleaners. And also historically, that dry cleaning site had been used as a gas station. So just a whole bunch of stuff potentially seeping into the ground. Luckily, because we were uphill and it was hard rock. Oh, sorry?
It's okay, I muted someone.
Oh, okay. Because it was uphill and it was hard rock, they didn't require the person buying the property to get a phase 1 environmental. However, Phil had a client that had bought a property downhill, kind of along the Bedford Highway, in between the Bedford Highway and the water side. But because it was downhill from all of this stuff, his client had to go and get a phase 1 environmental And I think they even went to a phase 2 environmental. So it just depends, you know, the way rainwater can flow through. So it's helpful to know not only what the site has been historically, but what any neighboring properties have been historically, as well as anything that could kind of flow through the groundwater that could potentially come through that could be a problem. So it is a lot of due diligence, and it might even be silly to think about what these surrounding properties have been, but it could save you and your client a lot of money, or specifically your client a lot of money in the future if you're kind of aware of what potential contaminants could be. And I think also something to do with the dry cleaners. There's certain chemicals that they use that could be harmful, and then certain ones that they use that aren't so bad. So I think they also wanted to test to see if these like harmful chemicals were in the soil. But something you have to keep in mind. Another thing that I've come across is the property condition environmental assessment. So this can be used if the building is quite old, and maybe if they don't require phase 1 environmental, they might require something like this. And these are all on top of the usual inspections as well. So you have your inspection with an inspector, and then you have someone come by afterwards to do, you know, the phase 1 environmental or the property condition environmental assessment.
So how long would your timelines be on that for like a phase 1 environmental or phase 2?
So that is going into the next one. Nice little segue. So deal lengths are much longer than residential. So your due diligence dates, you know, they can be months long. So going to the phase 1 environmental, it can take, or it usually takes at least 30 days from when you request the phase 1 to when you get the report back. So that alone is going to make your due diligence dates months long. You know, a lot of times, like, I guess so, like, because of that, you need to really prepare yourself and your client for these longer times. It's not like residential where you can put your offer in and basically, you know, a week or two later, you have the property. You put your offer in and you probably go back on the price. And then once you've agreed on the price, then you have to put all your due diligence dates. So you usually want to do like a couple months. Extensions are quite common if there's a commercial component, just because a lot of the stuff takes time. And it's not too common that you get a deal kind of fall through if you ask for an extension, because a lot of times the buyer is putting a lot of money into assessments or environmental, or, you know, and you can kind of use that as leverage. Like, listen, they've put a ton of money, they're serious, they're meeting all of their timelines. So yeah, like it can be a long time, but it just depends, you know, it depends on what type of things that are going to come up with the property, but you usually get something. The fun thing about commercial, every deal is different because you always get something popping up. So, I mean, it's kind of in summary, before you go see a mixed use property, you know, you should know your client's intended use of the property, if the zoning even allows for that use, and if they're aware of the extra costs associated with due diligence in a commercial property, and if they have the money to pay for these items as well as the down payment. So it can be an uncomfortable conversation to have that, you know, say you can probably expect this, and this. Do you even have the money? Of course, you probably don't want to say it exactly that way, and there's different ways that you can say it, but it is important to have those questions and to have those conversations. Otherwise, you're just kind of wasting your time. Now I'm open to questions. Anyone have any questions? Anything they feel like I didn't touch on enough, that I just kind of skipped over?
So phase 1 environmental is soil samples. Phase 2 environmental, how detailed do they get into that, and what does it entail?
That's a good question. A lot of times, like it's soil samples, and then in the phase 2, I think they start doing the investigating as to where a lot of these contaminants are coming from.
Okay. And then whether or not it needs to be, if they're contaminants that the soil needs to be cleaned, like an environmental cleanup, like an on-site, or it has to be removed and then taken back.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, if the site needs to be remediated.
Okay.
Yeah, whereas the phase 1 is just kind of determining what's in the soil to begin with. And if it has the, normal levels of what they expect to find.
Okay.
If, however, you can kind of get away with, like if there's been a previous phase 1 environmental done on the property, so that's always a good question to ask. Then you don't have to necessarily go ahead and do another one. Or if there's been any other type of like environmental type assessments done on the property, you can usually ask those questions. Then save yourself and your client a big step and a lot of money. As long as it's not too old, I think the bank should generally accept a previously phase 1 environmental.
Okay.
Sounds like a referral to me.
I know, that's what I think too, Alex.
There's just a lot that goes into it, but
yeah,
there is, and there's a lot that goes in, but there's a lot that you don't want to misstep on either.
Yeah.
Yeah, could get yourself in a heap of trouble in a hurry if you missed out on any of these parts, I would think.
Yeah. And it's just good to know what you have to know before you even go, because if you're asking these questions on site, it's like, well, we could have determined before that you can't do this, you can't do that. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and another thing I wanted to talk about with zoning, like say if it's not even the use that they want to do in their commercial property, but they want to tear the building down and build new, that's something else you can find with the zoning. It will let you know that if you were to tear the property down, what's the height restrictions? What's the parking restrictions? Maybe you can't get rid of all the parking, or maybe there's even uses that are grandfathered in that if you tear the building down, they can't rebuild that exact same thing. There are some areas in the south end this is with investment properties where it's like a 4-unit that's grandfathered in, but say if the building were to burn down, I think you can only rebuild like a 2-unit or something. So it's just like it's just good to know like those types of things before you even go.
Yeah.
And deal times, like because they're much longer typically, you don't really have that rush with residential that you typically do. And like it's good to also underwrite the property, and if they just want to buy it investment only and don't even want to put their business in it, you could find out what the income and expenses are and just kind of determine whether or not the building is making any money, if that's their intended use, all kinds of things.
Okay. Be lots of good conversation, lots of good questions to ask.
Yeah, so not a very long talk today. I hope I didn't talk too fast.
No, it was good.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating how it can be so different.
Yeah.
So, on rentals in buildings, how does that work? Like, does each of them, do they look for longer or specific time frames for the leases?
For residential?
No, for commercial.
So when we're leasing properties, typically landlords like a 5-year lease term. So that's kind of, I guess, the standard that they like. Now with the current state of everything right now, we're finding it harder to get those 5-year leases. So you might end up with something like 2 or 3 years. But I mean, depending on when the lease started, I guess you kind of find how much time you have left in the lease.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
Okay.
But sometimes, I mean, like leases could be 5 years, they could be 10 years, but 10 years is kind of rare now. You don't really see that as much anymore, but it's still possible.
Mhm.
So can you imagine buying a property or wanting to buy a property, put your business in it and find out the tenant is 1 year into a 10-year lease? You got to wait it out for 9 years.
Wow. I think you might keep looking.
But I mean, even mixed use, you don't see that many coming on the market these days.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
You do
don't.
see some, but you don't see that many.
Yeah.
I feel like most people are getting away from it and like separating the business and home life.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's usually a different business that you see
Yeah.
on the ground floor and then different residential tenants above.
Hmm.
But you're right, sometimes it's people living above their store, but I feel like you're not really seeing that as much anymore.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does that work then? Because our commission structure is really easy. And this is a question that I've always been like, oh, I wonder how it works with leases
Mhm.
for in commercial. How does the commission structure work on that? Or does it vary?
It does vary. I know that in industrial, there is still a percentage, but I guess if, on the office retail side, we're usually asking like a per square foot based on the square footage of the property and also based on how many years it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a calculation then.
Yeah, so it'd be smaller for, say, like a 1-year deal. It'd be a smaller per square foot rate for a smaller deal than it would be for a 5-year lease term. And then it also kind of plays into if there's an outside broker, then usually there's an override, and then the listing agent will get the override, and then the outside agent gets the full fee.
Even this is sounding complicated.
It's not just a percentage that we split, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is in investment properties because that's still a little bit more of like a residential component. But if you're looking at leasing, it's a little bit different.
Then that's different. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's really interesting. But I do think, I know there's a lot of agents, if there are mixed use properties that make, they're comfortable to take those because of the residential component to it, especially if they're still residential within it. But once we get outside that, I do think we tread on the line of walking outside our realm of expertise. So we need to be very careful.
But if you have any questions, you can always call or email me.
Yep.
Hi, Ali. Hi, Ali. This is Jatinder, and I have a question. And thank you so much for the information, first of all.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So regarding obviously the main part which we were discussing, like you were discussing, and I was listening, that they are depending, on the years and the square footage of the area. So for say example, there is a property which is listed for lease by some commercial agent, and my client is interested to open up a business over there. Area is for say example 5 or maybe let's say 5,000 square feet, and how it will be worked out, like the payment structure you mentioned over, and so if you can elaborate a little bit more.
So your client is looking at leasing a space.
Correct.
And how long are they planning on leasing for?
For say 3 years.
3 years, okay. And I guess how big is the space?
6,000 square feet.
6,000? Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna do a quick calculation here.
Okay. So if you hear something, my son is in background. I'm driving right now.
Okay, so 3-year lease and they've got a deal done.
Okay. And let's take a location for, say, Burnside.
Okay.
There, example, there is a property which is listed and 5,000 square feet. What would be the rate? I don't know. Probably you know better. I just need some kind of understanding on that part. So you can tell me what could be the roughly rent over there, and accordingly we can calculate the numbers.
Well, if you want to look at industrial rental rates, Phil and Matt Olson in our office, that's where they specialize. So they would
And
really know.
I just need rough numbers for the calculation of income.
Like if you're charging a fee.
Yes.
So typically you have to, it's like a percentage of the net rent. So you take the net rent and then times it by the square footage. So you end up with like a yearly amount, and then it's like a percentage. I think it usually starts at like 10% or something. I don't know. I like, honestly, I would ask Phil. It's like 10% of the year's net rent.
Okay, so if it is going for 3 years, then 10% of each year?
No. Then I think it's only something like 15%.
Okay. So if it's a short-term lease, then probably 10%, but if it is longer lease, then percentage is lesser, right?
I don't know if a 1-year lease is 10% though. Again, I would really reach out to Phil and Matt, just because like with the office space, it's typically more of like a per square foot. It's like $3 for a 5-year term, so I don't typically do like the percentages in that way.
Okay.
Because it is different in Burnside.
Okay. Okay. No worries. I just had this question, but yeah, I have some understanding. I will reach out to Phil in case I need to. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that's something good that's to know, like whether it's in Burnside or Bears Lake or Bedford, that all the industrial versus commercial, it's all different rates.
Anything with warehouse, or if it's, yeah, like if it's in Burnside, they just have different rates over there. Unless it's like specifically a retail or specifically an office, it might be a little bit different, but for the most part, like everything kind of has a warehouse component to it. And because of that, they have lower rates than what you would see in the office and retail side. So their fee structure is structured differently. So I apologize that I couldn't really help 100% because I'm not seeing that on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that's all good. And one more question I have.
Yeah.
Who pays the remuneration? Who pays? Like if I'm representing the the person who is gonna not buy, but who's
The
gonna rent
leasing
out the
agent?
lease? Yeah,
Yeah. So it's the landlord that pays.
both the sides.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
So it's like
Thank you.
it's the same when you sell a property. It's the seller that pays both fees. So when you have a
Okay.
client that's looking to lease a space, it's the landlord that pays both fees.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thank you.
Do you know if it's a large landlord or a smaller landlord?
I don't know. I just had a question and just asked it.
Okay, just because sometimes with smaller landlords, they try to get out of that, so.
Okay.
Whereas
I'll be-
larger landlords will kind of honor
Okay.
that more.
Got it. Well, thank you. Thank you for answering my questions. Oops. Well, thank you for answering my question. Sorry, I got a call in between.
Yep, no problem.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
No, I think I'm good. So I don't run into it very often. I haven't even ever showed a mixed use. I've just had a couple phone calls on them. And
Yeah.
most people I've had one call, I think, with like Tom a year ago, and he just said like, tell him to call me about it if you don't mind. And like, I think, yeah, the much larger down payment pretty much scares most people off once they learn that.
Yeah. And that's a big thing to know.
Yeah. I mean, most people, even in residential, when you tell them 20%, like they just can't.
Yeah.
And let alone 30 or 35.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like if it's a vacant unit, that can change it too, right? Because then it has no income coming in, and then you'd have to bring a tenant in there if you wanted to buy it investment wise.
Yeah.
So that changes things, especially if they're planning on financing it.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see too many people throwing down cash on a more expensive property.
Yeah.
Cash deal on a couple of $1 million. Sure.
Yeah.
But Alex, I want to know more about, I guess, your experience, like with what the community was saying about that mixed use property.
Yeah, it was a farm, or well, not really. It was a farm once upon a time in Windsor that the previous seller was running it as an Airbnb, and I think he was running it poorly, and it was zoned as just an R1 property. Anyway, my buyers went to the town to get it switched to like an MU1. So that way they can run it as an Airbnb, or not an Airbnb, like a bed and breakfast. Because so what they got to do is basically, of course, fees, paperwork, bureaucracy, all that fun stuff, and then it goes to like a town council meeting, and then it gets basically posted for X amount of days. And basically the community has the option to question it or give their thumbs down and all intents and purposes to it. They get like posted in like newsletters, and usually a sign goes out front of like the property itself. Like I know there was a property down here in Prospect that they were looking to develop, and there was a sign out front that this is the proposal. You have like basically it's going to be voted on X day in like 6 months time. Basically be there to say yay or nay to it. Yeah, it just sounds so like tribal.
That's why it's nice to be able to see if they can do what they want.
Yeah, they knew I mean, there's no rules with Airbnb. It's it's an active Airbnb now, even without the zoning being changed. But when people are running it, the other seller was running it as like a party shack, and of course the neighbors, like people were renting it for bachelor parties and weddings and stuff like that, and the neighbors got all cranked up. But my people are running it as like a family retreat kind of thing, and they've had no issues so far with neighbors. But that's just, they want to switch it so they could get like a B&B license in the future if they want.
That's the thing about Airbnbs, is that they're kind of skirting a lot of the rules.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I called our lawyer about it a few times. I've talked to her, and she just said, "There's no. It's like there's no rules.
Yeah.
Nobody that says you can. There's nobody that says you can't. An Airbnb is as good as your neighbor is, basically."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's renting. It's rented through to the end of June. It's already
Well,
paid
that's
for its
great.
first. It's already paid for its first year. So, but yeah, that's the only very minimal experience I've had with it. But yeah, any other commercial stuff, I'm just calling you.
Well, hopefully I can help you. I couldn't help to tender with that Burnside question.
Yeah, we have a friend who's done a few new changing the zoning for properties, and it's gone to community meetings and before HRM council, and it's quite a process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a long time.
It does, yeah. Like we're
Yeah.
talking, would they be in 7 years now
Yeah.
Yeah.
for the latest one? Yeah.
Especially now, like there's no meetings, like with COVID, like people aren't doing anything. Like I just briefly dealt with a heritage property, and we wanted, before we made a move on it, we wanted to know, could we put a pool in, or like, will the heritage designation keep us from doing that? And they said, well, it has to be voted on by the council, and the next meeting's not till July. I'm like, well, I can't ask for conditions to be till July.
Yeah.
And they said that's the only way they would do it, is like through a meeting, like an in-person meeting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whereas in commercial, you could probably push your conditions to July.
Yeah. You're lucky to get 2 weeks in residential.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Your guys' world is intense.
Yeah.
Ours is too, just in different ways, not in such
Yeah.
short timelines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're used to working on those longer timelines, I would think you would feel like you had a bit of breathing room. So as you're waiting for your phase 1 environmental to come back, then you're working on looking at all of the other things like your leases and your other items that are part of your conditions.
Yeah. And getting your financing in play and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like when you have your condition state, it's generally like a blanket condition state. So it could be, and it could be an actual date, or it could be like 30 days from like the deposit, like deposit has been delivered, or like 60 days from like deposit being delivered, something like that. And then closing date could be like 30 or 60 days from all conditions being met, so it's not always just like a firm date. Sometimes it's when something happens, then it kind of kicks off the next step.
Okay, feels like a bit of a moving target.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
You want to keep track of dates, but sometimes you got to be like, okay, like, is this date right now?
Right. Have to be on it and organized.
Yes.
You don't miss a date. Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I am good. Yeah, and I know I love referring. I've referred a couple things to Paul for SACPL.
Yeah.
So it's been awesome. And I know I talked to Tom about a couple of things. Probably a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great. Like I love having a commercial team to be able to take that and know that the clients are in excellent hands and that they're well taken care of.
Well, that's great. I feel bad. I mean, I'm not getting as many residential referrals back, but when I do.
Yeah, it's harder for you guys to work it the other way.
Yeah.
I think it's easier for us with some of our clients, and if they have properties, it's the next step then is to start asking questions about commercial or mixed use.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's easier for us, I think, to refer your direction. But
Yeah,
it's always good to know, Allie, that you're available, and we really appreciate it.
absolutely.
Quick,
If anyone has
one
any
thing quickly.
questions. Yeah.
One thing quickly, do you guys do anything with like farm and like ranch?
If it's
'Cause I
like
know
land, I would go to Paul. He's
Yeah,
kind of
'cause-
more our land guy.
Because I know that's another one on its own. Like that, if I'm gonna run into anything mixed use in my sphere, it'd probably be like a farm,
Yeah,
which is gonna have that commercial and residential element.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I personally have never come across anything like that. I mean, you could always call Tom with it, but I feel
Yeah.
like he would probably refer you over to Paul, or maybe take some of the details about it, and then it
Yeah.
would probably something that falls on Paul's lap, because he's got all that experience with land.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that's how we work too. Like, we work in a team, everyone has their own specialty. So, you know, I'm not just taking whatever referral comes my way. I'm kind of gaining some initial information and then passing it along to the appropriate team member.
Yeah. Cool.
Which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, because everyone has their own specialty. So, like, you know, someone like Johnny Yang really specializes in restaurants, and he's helped set up restaurants. So he knows how much like installation and stuff is going to cost, things that I know nothing about. You know, I can do some ground floor retail if it's, you know, not really food related, but if someone is actually looking to set up and find out how much it's going to cost them, you know, Johnny is that guy. And he also does business brokerage, and he's the only one in our office that does business brokerage too. And then, like I said, Phil and Matt, they're our industrial guys. So anything to do with warehouse, Burnside, you know, anything with warehouse, they're the guys that you want to talk to. I've been working with Tom a lot on the investment property stuff. I do some office as well. You know, so I can give feedback on office space and on an investment, but for the most part, it's you know, that's it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Allie.
Yeah. Thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time to pull this together and for presenting it. We really appreciate it, and know that, we'll be continuing to pass your name along.
Sounds good. And I'll refer you guys whatever I have.
Thank you.
All right.
Much
See you later.
appreciated.
All right.
All right.
See you later, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.